Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some of my book review pet peeves. I just want to get out of the way. Anytime I do a pet peeves video, I always feel a little bit bad because basically I'm complaining about things that don't matter. I have food, I have shelter, but these are things that personally irk me a little bit. Before I get into it, I definitely want you all to let me know what are some of your book review pet peeves. I am by no means insisting that this is the right way to do a book review or the existence of these things in your book reviews therefore negates all of your opinions. This is not like a note for other booktubers or anything like that or book reviewers. These are just some things that I personally usually I chuckle at if I see or I am slightly annoyed by. The first pet peeve on the list is definitely one of the sillier ones, but I have seen it so many times now and I'm always like, it's just don't expect that. Just don't expect it. And that's when people expect books to be like Game of Thrones because somewhere on the blurb, somewhere the marketing team decided to say this is like the new Game of Thrones. And people are like, it was nothing like Game of Thrones. And I'm just like, okay. Sometimes I'm like, did you read the synopsis though? I get it. I get how obnoxious false marketing can be. Everything is the next Game of Thrones, according to marketing teams. But I still don't feel like we should hold that against books. And I have seen it so many times where sometimes all a book review will say is, this was nothing like Game of Thrones. And I'm just like, that's not helpful. I don't mind if from an informative standpoint, you let people know, hey, it's marketed as an African Game of Thrones, the Asian Game of Thrones, the young adult Game of Thrones, but I personally didn't feel that way. Here's why. I don't mind that whatsoever. I just get a little bit frustrated when people decide a book is 1 star, is 2 star, is a sucky book. Just because the blurb said it was gonna be Game of Thrones. I'm gonna stick with another silly one. This is one I don't necessarily feel annoyed by. I kind of feel bad, and I sort of understand because everybody goes into books with a different rating system, so I kind of understand people using this as a reason to rate something low, but at the same time, I'm like, really though? And that's when people rate something low because it's sad. I've seen book reviews. These are usually very brief book reviews on, Goodreads or something where a person's like, this book was too sad. And then that's their review. And sometimes they'll even say the book was good, but it was just one sad thing after the next. And I like happy reads. And part of me is like, that's not the book's fault though. Those two are on the sillier side. The next one is a little more on the controversial side. And that's when people rate something low because any form of diversity they see as forced diversity. And the reason that I'm kind of saying this is controversial is because we have all picked up books that have token characters that are really cringy. The representation clearly was not well researched, or the author has no idea what they're talking about, and they didn't even try to actually talk to people who they are trying to have represented in their books. They put no effort in, and it almost feels like a sales thing, a marketing element. And I understand everyone who's ever been frustrated at that. That's not what I'm talking about. I have seen book reviews that literally the existence of a gay person, they can't just admit, I don't want to see gay people in my books. It's there was this whole plot line with this forced gay guy and just it ruined the whole book. And you're like, you mean that one guy was gay? That's it. You're just upset that there was a gay guy. Or the same goes because not every character in the book is a white person, or maybe there were more female characters than male characters or whatever. People getting upset because they're just going to label everything as forced and therefore bad, when in actuality it's like, is it forced if it's just a person existing? People exist that are different than you, and having them in a book doesn't automatically make the book bad. On a very similar note, it's also like when people, for example, I'm a very pale lady, and if I'm reading a book about a black man in America, and I come out of that book and I go, I just couldn't relate. Because I literally don't know what it's like to be a black person in America, and somehow that's the book's fault. I just think that's ridiculous. Of course, I'm not going to relate 100% to every single character, But was that character well written? Was the story well written? Was the pacing good? Was the setting interesting? That kind of stuff. That's what should matter. If you can't relate to something because you've never gone through it, that's not a reason to rate something low. If you can't relate because the author did a terrible job of actually writing something, that's one thing. But not being able to relate to something because you don't look like the main character, or because you have different body parts than the main character, or because you like different people than the main character, not a reason to give a book a low rating. I'm going to sort of lump the next two together because I think they go hand in hand. And that would be not recognizing that your book review is your opinion, and also not recognizing that other people's book reviews are their opinions. So if somebody didn't interpret something the same way as someone else, that doesn't make them incorrect. It just means they interpreted the book differently. A book review is not somebody's opportunity to assert their opinion as fact or their opinion as the correct one. It's also not the opportunity to put other people down as if their opinions are incorrect. That's not what book reviews are for. That's for you trying to elevate your ego because apparently it's not big enough. I can't stand when people don't understand that book reviews are subjective, just like books. If books were objectively good or bad, there'd be a book that every single person could look at and be like, that's good. But you can't, because it's a form of art. And there are some books that I'm like, that book is trash, I want to use it for kindling. And other people are like, this is a masterpiece, and I don't see it. But they're not wrong. In their mind, it's a masterpiece, and that's great for them. However, if they're going to turn around and act like I'm somehow incorrect by not agreeing that it's a masterpiece, then I just question their intelligence a little bit, because I'm like, I don't think you understand what subjective means. It's an opinion. It's an opinion. It's not, I don't understand. This is why I apologized at the beginning of the video, basically, and I was like, I know that these are just little not important things, because I knew I was going to get worked up, and I swear that I know deep down this is not important, but I can't stand when people are pretentious, and when they can't respect other people's opinions. If you have a different opinion about a book, if you love something that I don't love, great, I'm so happy that you liked it. I recommend books that I don't like, knowing that it will appeal to some other people. It just didn't appeal to me because I have different tastes than other people. I don't get why some people don't get this. Next one, I don't know how many of you are gonna have seen this before, but I really like book reviews. I like seeing other people's opinions about things. And I have found sometimes people, let's say that you hate adult fantasy, and you're like, adult fantasy, it's a bunch of male wish fulfillment, and it's always ladies getting naked for no reason, and sexual violence, and like, that's your view of adult fantasy. Now, adult fantasy has some of those things, right? Just like young adult fantasy has some fluffy, silly stuff in it, right? You have these stereotypes for a reason. However, that doesn't mean the entirety of that age range and or genre is that thing. So what frustrates me is confirmation bias. When somebody already has decided in their mind, the example I just gave of adult fantasy, like that's what all adult fantasy is, and then they find like the book that's kind of known for being that thing. If I think that adult fantasy is like that, I'm probably not going to pick up Black Prism, because there's a lot of discussion about, I'm not saying Black Prism is that, but there have been lots of conversations that Black Prism is potentially got the like guys constantly looking at women's bodies and describing women's bodies or whatever. And if I'm a lady who's like, I don't want any of that, and then I'm like, it's all there ever is, and then I read it and I'm like, I knew it. See, it's just typical adult fantasy or whatever, and I get all upset about it. It's because it's my fault. I picked the one that I knew if I had done a second of research that's what it's like. Same with young adult. If I think young adult is a bunch of ridiculous, pining, angsty teen romance, and I pick up Throne of Glass, I'm just asking to have my confirmation bias. Now, there's nothing wrong with knowing your taste and not really wanting to have to dig through an entire age range or genre to get to that little gem that is not the stereotype. I don't mind if you just don't want to do that and you're like, I have my thing, I know I like this is what I like, this is what I want to read. Totally fine. I just don't like when people pick up one time something else. They already have an idea in their head, they pick up something one time, and then basically the whole review is, see, this is why I don't read this. The last point is one that sometimes I think is just maybe the way the book is marketed or where it's sold in bookstores. I don't know that it's necessarily book reviewers' fault that this is the impression they have, but I remember somebody, one of you, linked this thread from the author Samantha Shannon, who has written a couple of different works in adult fantasy at this point. And she had a whole thing on Twitter about what does a female author in adult fantasy have to do for her book to be considered adult fantasy. Because I have seen pretty much every adult fantasy book that you can think of written by a woman considered YA by someone, either saying this is basically YA, or they flat out think it's young adult and they treat it like young adult. I don't know why, if it's known that the author is a lady, why everybody thinks that it's young adult. I don't think there's anything wrong with young adult. It's just a lot of times this is said in a derogatory way. It's said as, another just typical young adult book, or something along those lines. They say it as if it's an offensive thing. Also, I want to add, even if they don't say it as an offensive thing, it's very frustrating to constantly be miscategorized when there are other people who will decide that it is lesser or won't pick it up because they already have a negative idea in their mind of young adult books. And to give you some examples, a lot of things by V.E. Schwab have been said to be basically young adult. The Poppy War, I have seen somebody say it's basically young adult. The Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, Queens of Renthia by Sarah Beth Durst, Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And what's funny about this one is one of the reviews that I saw that basically tied it to young adult said that there are more things to keep track of in that standalone than there was in Wheel of Time, and it's just so giant in scope, yet somehow it's young adult. I don't know. It just, if it's written by a lady, chances are one of the negative reviews is going to say that it's young adult. Or when people are like, I'm looking for a decent young adult book, somebody will say, try Farseer by Robin Hobb, and you're like, it's not young adult. Again, I love both adult and young adult fantasy. I have nothing against either, but I don't understand. I don't get it. Why everything that's written by a woman in adult fantasy, at some point, some reviewer's gotta be like, that's young adult, right? Anyway, ranting over. I knew I was gonna start ranting. I was hoping I would be able to keep my cool because it's not that important, but I started to go off anyway. Hopefully it was entertaining for you. Let me know what some of your book review pet peeves are. I know that I don't rate books in my book reviews, and if that's a pet peeve of yours, I promise I won't be annoyed if you are like, I hate when book reviewers don't say their rating. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.